Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Ali. I'm a junior doctor working in Cambridge, and this video is going to be a behind the scenes look at the new podcast that I'm starting. It'll be linked in the description below. At the moment, it's called Intercourse and the website is intercourse.fm, but I am vaguely thinking about changing the name after feedback from various people who were not fans of the name. Haven't decided yet, we'll see. Anyway, in this video, I'm going to be unboxing all of this new gear that's just arrived from Amazon, which should hopefully step up the audio quality and the video quality of the podcast. And then once it's all set up, I'm going to be hopefully using one of these fancy new microphones to share my thoughts and reflections about why I'm starting the podcast firstly, and also a little bit about kind of why I spent so much money on all this gear, even though I've never done this podcast thing before. And I'll talk a little bit about how I'm learning this whole process of audio production, podcasting. In general, I quite like documenting the behind the scenes of stuff that I'm doing, and I wish it's something that people did more often, because generally we get to see the final result. We don't see like the first time a podcaster did their first podcast and how they felt about it and stuff. And like personally, I really enjoy watching behind the scenes of stuff, like whether it's YouTubers or podcasters or authors, because I think seeing how they got started is always quite inspirational, because it reinforces the idea that anyone could do this sort of stuff, and you don't need anything special to do it. You just need a kind of a willingness to learn and adapt and all of that stuff. So whether or not this podcast goes anywhere, I still think it'll be interesting to see the behind the scenes of it, and at the very least it'll be something good to look back on in a few years' time, that, oh, okay, that was something that I felt like doing back in the day. Anyway, so let's get this stuff unboxed and set up, and then hopefully we can try out the new microphone, and then I'll ramble on a little bit more about my thoughts on this whole podcasty and documenty topic. Okay, so I'm going to put this stuff away because the thumbnail is done and I don't need it anymore for now. Let's start with the audio recorder. Now this is the Zoom H5, which I picked up on the Amazon Prime Day sale a few weeks ago. The good thing about this is that you can plug in multiple XLR inputs. And the way I wanted this podcast to work is that I wanted to have at least two microphones, one for each of the guests, plugged into an audio recorder, and then both guests be able to monitor the audio. The inspiration for this whole setup is Matt D'Avella's podcast, The Ground Up Show. The production value on that is literally the best production value of any kind of interview format that I've ever seen in my life, with the exception of maybe the Masterclass. The Masterclass videos are absolutely sick, but that's like multi-million-dollar operation. Matt D'Avella's podcast is a one-man operation, and it just looks so good. And that's kind of where the inspiration for this setup came from. And apparently, from watching YouTube videos, because I really don't know anything about this audio stuff, apparently the preamps in this are quite good. So you can get a good amount of gain. My understanding of this whole audio stuff is that when you plug in microphones like these into a recorder, you need to give them a lot of volume boost. If you have a good volume boosty sort of device like this, or you can get externals as well, but those cost more money. If you have a good gain adding device, it adds volume to the audio without adding background hiss. If you just took audio from this, plugged it into a laptop, and then tried to bump up the volume, you'd get so much hiss in the background, it would just be completely unusable. Next, we have two Rode Procasters. I spent ages on YouTube looking at reviews and stuff of all these microphones. I was considering the Shure SM7Bs, which is the one that Matt D'Avella uses, the Y Combinator podcast uses. A lot of pro podcasters use the Shure microphones, but that was a little bit on the expensive side. I thought these Rode Procasters were, you know, quite pretty and a good sweet spot between price and quality. All right, so let's see what this is like. Oh, it comes in a little leather pouch thing. That's a good touch. Now, moment of truth. Here we go. Oh, this feels legit. This metal. This feels like a premium product. This is nice. I like this. I'm enjoying this so far. All right, here's number two. Next, we've got the Rode PSA Studio Arm, which is what you attach the microphone to. And again, I spent ages looking at YouTube reviews and scouring the internet, and this seemed to be a good option. They were quite expensive. I'll put all the prices in the description below if you're interested. But, you know, investing in quality, we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the video. Oh, hello. Yeah, this feels good. I'm liking this so far. All right, number two. This is what it looks like. Next, we have the shock mounts. Again, looked on the internet. These PSM1 shock mounts seemed the most legit option, so why not? Oh, this is cool. And then finally, we've got these pop shields. And these minimize like the plosive P sounds. So that's everything unboxed. Let's now set up one of the microphones and we'll see if it's any good. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Okay, so we've got the boom arm, the shock mount, and the microphone with the pop filter set up. I'm already noticing a few issues with autofocusing. Like if I move this into the wrong place, the camera will probably focus on the microphone instead of my face. So Need to either start respecting manual focus or work out a way around this. I think it should be all right at this angle. But yeah, that's it. Let's now plug some XLR cables in and see what the audio quality is like. So next thing you hear is going to be audio from this microphone. So there were a few quick things that I wanted to talk about, and this seems like a chance as any. Firstly, why did I start this podcast? Why did I get all this gear? Essentially, the main reason is that there are a lot of videos that I wanted to do with friends of mine, people that I admire in one way or another, and I think they've got a lot of advice, a lot of tips that they can share with the audience of this YouTube channel. So in the past, when I've done collaborations like with Ibsmo and with Maticus and with Parth and with other people, we've kind of just been using a standard sort of two people sitting on a sofa format. And that's all right, but because I quite like pushing the boundaries of production value, and because got inspiration from Matt D'Avella and his style, I thought that creating a podcast for the purpose of facilitating interviews between me and my friends, I think that was kind of the main reason for it. The podcast at the moment, I'm not planning for it to be a regular thing. It'll just be whenever I've got a friend coming over, or if I'm going around a friend's place and we've got something to say, then I'll take the podcast equipment and we'll record the podcast out of it, we'll film them, and then we'll turn some of that into a YouTube video and some of that, and like the whole audio will stick on the podcast. So at the moment, it's quite a low effort thing to maintain, I hope. But having said that, I still wanted the production value to be quite high, hence all of this equipment. Secondly, why did I get all of this equipment? This was at least a few £100, I think in the region of £500-600. And there's two schools of thought here. The first one is that the gear doesn't really matter. The content is far more important, provided you have like a baseline level of audio quality, because audio quality is far more important than video quality. Provided you have that baseline level, people care much more about the content than they do about the production value. Then there's the other school of thought that's like, yeah, that might be true to an extent, but if you can add production value, then people do appreciate that. And that's what I noticed from Matt D'Avella's podcast as well. He said like really early on that there are so many podcasts out there in the world, but the one thing that he knew he could make his own one stand out is because he was a filmmaker, by having just really good production value, good audio, good video, filmed really nicely with good color grading, etc., etc. And the sorts of people that watch his show are the sorts of people that would appreciate that level of production value. So the way I think about it, yeah, I agree that content is the most important thing, and to an extent gear doesn't matter, but I kind of view buying gear as investing in myself. So I'm a big fan of personal finance, a big fan of investing in stuff in general, and I keep in the back of my mind what I call the 10% rule. I don't know if I came up with it, it's probably a thing that someone else came up with as well. The premise of the 10% rule is that an investment is generally considered good if it yields you 10% a year. So for example, if you buy a house and you can rent it out for whatever, and let's say you put in 100,000 into the house. Back in the day, that's no longer really possible, especially in the south of the UK. Let's say you bought a house for £100,000. Traditional teaching on this matter is that if you can get a 10% return on that, i.e. every year you would make 10% of that value back. So every year you'd be making £10,000 in rent. That would be considered a really good investment. So by the end of 10 years, you will have made back your initial investment, because 10% a year. And then beyond that point, any additional money you make from that would be pure profit. So 10% is kind of like the gold standard in terms of real estate. These days in the south of England, it's almost impossible to get a 10% yield on anything. I've done a few back of the envelope calculations for houses that my family and my friend rent. And the yield their landlord is getting is sometimes 1%, sometimes 2%, sometimes 3%. So 10% is kind of the ideal. 10% is also sort of close to the figure of if you invest in something like the S&P 500, which is a stock market index that's made up of the top 500 companies in the US. On average, that returns in the region of 10% a year, or has done for the last 30 years, depending on who you ask. It kind of hovers around 7% to 9%, depending on what sort of assumptions you make. Anyway, so 10% is like, if you can get the 10% return by investing in the S&P 500, that's also pretty good. The way I view spending money on, like investing money in stuff like this, is I ask myself the question of, fine, I've spent, let's say £1,000 on audio equipment. Do I anticipate getting a 10% return on that? I.e., in the next 10 years, will I make that £1,000 back? And then this thing will continue to hopefully generate revenue. And when it comes to stuff like camera equipment, or upgrading my microphones, or getting a studio monitor, or getting some lighting, the answer to that is generally yes. Like, I've definitely spent at least about £5,000, if not more, on camera and microphone equipment throughout the last few years. And I've actually pretty much made all of that back already in like after about a year of doing YouTube, from like YouTube ad revenue and brand deals and all this sort of stuff. I also have this business on the side that runs courses for medicine applicants, sixmed.co.uk, and people have gone to that from my YouTube videos. So in a way, it almost doesn't matter how much money I spend on equipment for YouTube videos and for podcasts and stuff, because all it needs is just a handful of people to be in that market of applying to medicine and then see my content and think, oh, this guy's pretty good, I like his content. And then they follow the link in the video description to my courses, and then they'll sign up for one of our courses or our online question bank, and then that money kind of comes back to me. So in a roundabout way, the way I view buying all the stuff is that it's an investment, and I think it's an investment that will have a greater than 10% yield, which is why I don't feel bad at all when I buy fairly expensive camera gear, because I kind of know that, or I vaguely have this idea that, okay, I'm pretty sure that in the next 10 years I'll probably make this money back. And so far, that's turned out to be a bet that's worked every time. Maybe the podcast won't go anywhere. I'm having very, very low expectations about it, and that's another thing that I like to do, like not really having goals in terms of the numbers, not really having expectations in terms of how I think things will work out. There's a really good episode of The Tim Ferriss Show, one of my favorite podcasts, where he's interviewing Jason Fried, who is a software developer who founded the company Basecamp. And Jason talks about how he doesn't like to have goals or doesn't like to have expectations. And this is a very Stoicism thing as well. It's just generally good practice according to Stoicism, and I fully agree with this, to not really have many expectations in your life at all. So I'm putting a lot of effort into this podcast. I've got all the equipment. I'm hopefully going to get the production value right. But I have pretty much zero expectation in terms of how it'll work out. And even if no one downloads it, I still think it'll have some value, because the main purpose of the podcast in a way is to facilitate making YouTube videos with my friends. And even if no one watches those YouTube videos, at least it gives me, a couple of hours to have a conversation with my friends, which is, the sort of conversation that you tend not to have outside of a podcast format. Like, the stuff I'd want to ask my friends is about their morning routines, about their favorite quotes, about, methods they use for productivity. And, having a structured conversation about that, it's just not something that you would do in real life outside of a podcast format. So, very worst case scenario, no one listens to the podcast, no one watches the videos, but I still get to have these conversations with my friends. And over time, that is absolutely worth the, £600 I've paid for this podcast equipment. Finally, the reason I'm documenting sort of the behind the scenes of this is that having been doing YouTube for just over a year, I've got a lot of messages from people saying, how did you first learn editing? Or, have you got any tips for editing? And also when I put videos on my Instagram story, you can follow me on Instagram. When I put videos on my Instagram story of me playing the piano and singing songs, I also get a lot of messages of how did you learn to play the piano? How did you learn to sing? I always kind of wish that, I only learned to play the piano like 3 years ago, and I really wish I'd videoed myself learning how to play, because just seeing the progression, like at this point, if people see my videos of me playing the piano and singing, people will think that, oh, this guy's pretty good at piano, and hopefully they'll think he's pretty good at singing. But that really was not the case, and I think if I'd videoed myself, or if anyone in that position videos themselves or makes any kind of content that shows how they first got started, and then they get to a point where people think they're good, I think that is a really good way of A, inspiring people, and B, teaching people what they can do to get to that level if that's what they want to do. So I'm going to be working on some videos talking about how my method of learning how to play the piano, by pretty much just following YouTube videos and doing chords and then singing along with them. And I've got some tricks for that, but it's not quite the same as, if I had the footage from 4 years ago when I was first learning. And one of the people I admire on the internet, Gary Vaynerchuk, says this a lot. He has this idea of document, don't create. Like when you're a content creator and you're in this whole industry, his idea is that you want to be documenting the process of you doing stuff rather than thinking that you have to create content in a way. And he makes the point that 10 years ago when he was starting his wine library business for the first time, it would have been absolutely amazing if he'd kind of made videos talking about his thoughts and feelings at the time. Now he's a multimillionaire in charge of a multi-million-dollar company, but it would have been really cool to see how he got started, what his thoughts and feelings were as this whole thing sort of happened. So I've kind of taken this mantra on board to document, don't create. And I hope that, it's quite fun for me. I quite like documenting the process. It's fun to look back on. I look back on my initial vlogs from Elective and I think, I'm glad I did that. But secondly, I hope at some point, it might be useful / inspirational / whatever for anyone else who's watching this. And finally, while we're on this kind of just general stream of consciousness, there's another principle that I came across in a book. I think it's called Show Your Work by Austin Kleon. And I wrote about this on my blog when first starting a blog for the first time in January 2016. That was my New Year's resolution. His thing is, like, often a lot of us, and definitely this was the case for me, and this is definitely the case for people I've spoken to and talked to via Instagram, people asking me questions, is that there's this barrier in our heads. Like, we want to create something like starting a blog or a podcast or a YouTube channel or whatever, but we think that no one's going to care, and we think that, oh, who am I to comment on starting a podcast? I've never started a podcast before. Who am I to start a YouTube channel? What do I possibly have to say that anyone would be interested in? And he says that in this book, he says that just ask yourself, will what I'm making help at least one person in some way or another? And in most cases, the answer to that is yes. Like, let's say you're a secondary school student and you're just starting your GCSEs, and you make a video about, just how you found revising for physics. That might seem like a pretty standard thing, and you're probably going to be thinking, oh, no one's going to care about that. But if you ask yourself, will this help at least one person? Then the answer is yes, there is going to be at least one person in the world who will find that video useful. And I think that's a good bar to set. That's at least what I try to do. So this video, for example, it's not really the sort of video I normally make on this channel, but I'm thinking, will it help at least one person? And I think the answer is yes. I think in a way, I'm making this video for myself a few months ago. I would have liked to see a video like this of someone just starting a podcast app for the first time, showing what setup they're using, and then kind of explaining the rationale behind it. I think that's an interesting video. So will it help at least one person? I certainly hope so. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully the audio quality from this is good. If not, we'll just revert to the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus, and I'll probably switch it around a bit so that we can compare. But thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, please consider doing so. And if you want to check out the podcast, you can go on intercourse.fm. Bit of a rogue name, I know. If you have any ideas for other things I could name the podcast, please let me know in the comments or via Instagram or whatever. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.